Hey, what's up? Hello, I hope you all are doing well. There's been a hedge trimmer and a wood chipper outside where I live for a long number of hours today, but you know what? I won't be stopped, so if you hear it in the background, please ignore it. That being said, today's review is of A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, the follow-up to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing that came out in 2018. So this book picks up right where the last novel left off, just about, and sort of becomes a memoir type style where everyone is noticeably talking about how they're all writing a book together. All of the characters, the main characters from the previous novel, sort of coping with the aftermath of what happened in the very dramatic ending of the last book. And as everyone is sort of carrying along, trying to figure things out, they're coping with a lot of the same troubles that April was having. April May, who's our main character from An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, they're coping with a lot of the same struggles that she was having as an individual, except they've sort of broadened and they're being had now on a larger scale. Most notably, April's friend Andy is having a particular struggle because he's sort of the natural to fill in April's place. People are really looking to him for advice and thoughts and is sort of a global thought leader in a way. Maya, who was close with April in the first book, is sort of struggling with the loss of this person who was so close to her, and Miranda is sort of coping in her own way in her science lab in California. And like I said, each of these characters is sort of taking turns writing chapter after chapter of this book, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, trying to make it through and recount what's happened to them over the course of a year or so since the end of the last book. There were two characters that I predominantly enjoyed in this second book, and the first was Andy, who I felt was a really good characterization, hyper-realistic almost, of someone who's had a large amount of social pressure thrust upon them and now being asked to carry on changing the world, just sort of the taking of the mantle from April, but in a rather different way. He's much more of an influencer on different levels that he might not have been in the past. I felt that the way that he handled a lot of situations, a lot of the mistakes he made were incredibly realistic, and I think we've sort of seen characters like Andy unfold in the last few years and try and struggle with wanting to be a part of something greater and not really knowing where their voice fits in, so to say, and not knowing how to continue on from something else that's sort of been left for them. His struggle is very much a reflection of April's, but somehow on a very different level. What I liked about Andy's character is almost what I didn't like about April in the first book. They are quite similar in the way that they are given problems by the author, and what I didn't love about April the last time around was that I felt like she didn't have an outlet or someone to really discuss everything with. She kept a lot inside, some of that for plot reasons, but she didn't have an outlet for working through a lot of the things that she was going through. And we see with Andy in this situation that he does have a little bit more of an outlet. He's got folks that he speaks to. He sort of, lends himself to a magical object, but also to real people who sort of, tap his shoulder and say, hey man, what are you doing? A little bit more than April allowed other people to. And in saying that, I do sort of have a back burner wondering, because April and Andy do sort of have parallel tracks in a way of hyper influencing the global sphere, the zeitgeist, if you will. And I do wonder if sort of I'm naturally preconditioned to dislike April for reasons that I might like Andy simply because April is a woman. And I've been kind of wondering about that for a couple days since I finished the book. Like, why did she annoy me so much last time and Andy didn't annoy me nearly as greatly as April did the last time around? So things to think about. And secondly, I really appreciated Maya. She was, I can't say it any other way, Maya was just so human. And if you've read the book, you'll understand more what I mean about that. But Maya was very human, very kind, and probably more so than I think a lot of people could have been expected to be. Very forgiving, just the best of us, the best of them, really, in this book. And she was always there. She was always there, and I enjoyed reading her thoughts in the chapters that she was given probably the most out of anyone. It was nice to have a grounded voice that was committed and also just ever present and clearly the link between all of these people. Nothing in this book could have been done without Maya. So like I mentioned before, this book is a bit of a memoir with each of these characters unfolding the story in their own various chapters, and they're very aware that they're writing a book. There's mentions of chapters and, you know, I can't believe I'm writing this, or I'm the one that has to write this, or something like that. It's very obvious that, like, this is a book about a book. Like, they understand. And that was a bit of a throw for me, almost, because I couldn't quite remember. I really should have reread An Absolutely Remarkable Thing before I read this. I couldn't quite remember whether or not that was how the last book was done. I do remember that there were a lot of lists in the last book, and there were fewer lists in this book, which I did appreciate. But either way, it was still a pontification and an exploration of power, and the social internet as well, and the effects of it, and what happens to people who harness some kind of power with a large and broad reach. But it was a little bit different from the first book. The last book was a very much an individual level and struggling with that, and this was sort of all of the characters together coping with what that meant. A lot of it was focused on Andy, yes, and later on it became more focused on other characters as well, but I felt like there was a broader scope to these sort of sociological explorations of power and understanding and how we hold on to what we want and distribute that power. And again, much like the last review I made of one of Hank Green's books, I have to say that I've seen folks who don't think that these explorations belong in this novel or belong in a novel at all. And it was clear that that was what was going on. Like, these were themes that were brought up within the context of a story to really work through things and to really say, hey, you know, here's my opinion, and I'm going to wrap my opinion in this novel. And I think sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. And it often can depend upon how tight the story is that holds on to that opinion. And I would say out of 10 that this book hits like a 7 for how well that works. But I don't think that those ponderings and explorations don't belong in a story like this. I'm disagreeing with everybody who thinks that was distracting or shouldn't be in the book. Because, and this is gonna probably piss a lot of people off, so I'm ready for your comments, but there are so many books that are just folks having opinions or having a specific experience and wanting to expound upon it and wrapping a story in those ideas. There are so many books which are just sort of sociological or philosophical treatises that are wrapped in a novel. So many like that. And this is no different. This is just a little more forward-facing with what that is than others. And it's not poorly done, but I do see how it can put people off. But again, I'll come back to the idea that if you know the author, and if you don't, then I can understand how that doesn't read obviously to you. But if you are familiar with the author, and my assumption is that there are very likely a majority, I would suggest, of readers who are familiar with the author and the way that the author speaks and the work that the author does, to whom this really should not be a surprise. This style of speech, this style of writing should not be a surprise. And if you liked the first book, it stands to reason that you might like this one because they're done in similar ways. So I didn't really find the upfront pontification to be a problem. I would actually be very keen to take a university level sociology class where these books are read and explored. I think that would be a fantastic thing to do, particularly since Hank Green has said that this book was written before the global pandemic. And actually, the word pandemic is mentioned like 3 or 4 times in this book, which I guess it was there prior to anything going on in the world. So I think it would be fascinating to see these dissected at an academic level now. I was also glad that in this book we sort of got an explanation of some of the things that I really didn't enjoy from the last book. The explanation of the whole grape jelly situation, I was glad to hear about. That sort of made more sense to me. I was glad I had that closure on something that really pissed me off in an absolutely remarkable thing. But I do feel like we were left with grape jelly situations in this book too, like the white rocks and the potato plant and its ever-present significance, the soundtrack that's always being heard, and things like that, where I wasn't sure why we were getting these little tidbits and what I was missing in reading them and not totally understanding their firm relevance. And the reason I said before that I would give it a 7 out of 10 in rating how well the philosophizing takes place within the story was because there were sort of several plot points that I didn't really feel we had a lot of closure on or explanation on, which sort of got drowned out a little bit for me in all of the working through and the exploration. There were also moments where I felt we leaned a little too much on sort of this omnipresent voice of all-knowingness that was guiding a lot of these characters. Felt like that was just sort of like dragging everyone along, like this will always be here to get us to the end, so that I've got time to talk about the deep exploration of the social mindset and the zeitgeist and the internet and power's effect on all of those things. So I wasn't totally sure about that balance, but I will tell you what I think my absolute favorite thing about this book is, which happens about 150 pages in, and it is a shift in the writing. And I love that the shift is immediately addressed as if the character is speaking to an invisible comment section that they know is going to happen. And that comment section is the reader of the book. And I just think that the way that is done is incredible. The calling out of the readership about what they might potentially be thinking resonated so much with me that I pretty much shut the book and was like, yes, this is how it's done. Thank you for saying it, because I do this all the time. I wish more authors did things like that, when they just address their reading public and are like, hey, I know how this is gonna go, so let's talk about it right now. It was great. It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So all of that being said, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I did that because I enjoyed it. And while I enjoyed it, I'm not entirely sure that I liked it. So make of that what you will. If you have thoughts on A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to talk to you more about it. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives, and we'll see you very soon. That being said, today's review is of an absolute... No, it's not.